So, so I think you have a few smaller states like Iowa, right, that could conceivably be won by a Democrat. We now hold 3 of the 4 congressional districts in Iowa, having flipped 2 in the last election, and the only remaining person is Steve King, and he may go down. Right, he's a total disaster.
Go J.D. Schulten.
And so, that's right. And so, you know, could you see a scenario where Iowa swings back in our direction, particularly given what happened in the midterm elections? Yeah. You know, New Hampshire, could the president swing New Hampshire back in his direction? Possibly. Who knows? Hard to imagine, but that small state could go in the other direction. But those aren't enough to make a difference, right? And so then when you say, okay, well, California and New York will stay blue, Texas likely to stay red, though the margin is closing. Could you make an argument, right? Virginia, we'll see what happens in the November elections. But it looks like we have a shot to take over both the House of Delegates and the state Senate. All we have to do is win 2 seats in each, and then we'll have complete control of government in Virginia. That would probably suggest that Virginia's gonna stay Democratic. You know, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, maybe, right? Florida, maybe. But you go through those states that are traditionally in the swing state category, and I think for a lot of us, it goes back to Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Now, the good news is, if you look at his margin for error versus the Democratic margin for error, it's a vast difference, right? So he wins by, I think, 77,000 votes in those 3 states. And that's with significant Russian interference, social media activity. I don't want to dwell on the whole Mueller situation, but you know, there was an August meeting between Manafort and Kilimnik. Kilimnik's a Russian spy and operative. Manafort hands over polling data for Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin to Kilimnik. Then all of a sudden in the fall, Russian operatives launched malign social media activity targeting voters in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. So you had, right? You had all of that happening. And then you had Hillary Clinton not spending a day in Wisconsin, a day during the general election. Barely showed up in Michigan until 7 to 10 days out. Spent time in Pennsylvania, but didn't see that, that she was losing blue-collar voters in certain parts of the state that had been traditional Democratic voters, right? So you have all of that happening. He still wins by 77,000 votes. Voter suppression activity in Michigan and Wisconsin, which at the time were controlled by Republican governors, and now it's Democratic governors, right? But then 2 years after that, there's 6 races in those 3 states that are high profile. 3 Senate races, 3 governor's races. Democrats went 6 for 6 in 2018. All 3 senators won, who were Democratic senators running for re-election. And when you look at the gubernatorial races, you had a Democratic governor in Pennsylvania running for re-election. You had a Republican governor in Wisconsin, Scott Walker, running for re-election. You had an open seat in Michigan. So from a social science perspective, you had everything, right? 1 offense, 1 defense, 1 open. 3 for 3. Now, no one will argue that any of those candidates represented the second or third coming of JFK, Bill Clinton, or Barack Obama. Yet, Democrats collectively in those 3 gubernatorial races won by 1.3 million votes. So you have 77,000 Trump in those 3 states in 2016. You had Democratic margin of victory when you aggregate those 3 races together, 1.3 million. That tells me that his margin for victory, narrow, error. Our margin, we have a lot of room. It's the right candidate with the right message who spends the right amount of time in those 3 states. So I think we're gonna go wider, but I think there's a real opportunity for us to reclaim those states if you just look at the numbers.